What are the gaps in land, labor, environment, and finance governance when we are at the stage of closing of coal mines? So do join on 20th to hear our findings on coal mining. Today, we will discuss our research outcomes on thermal power plant. I have a short presentation to contextualize why we are discussing this, and then I will hand it over to Manvi to actually present the main findings of our research. Let me start by saying that, as I said, that thermal power plants are being closed every day. In last 5 years, for which we have data, as much as 12,000 megawatt worth of thermal power plants were closed in the country. 126 units were retired between March 2016 and June 2021. They had nothing to do with climate change or environment for that matter. They closed because of techno-economic and commercial reasons. Now, if you look at this map on the right-hand side, you find that, Manvi, there is some problem with recording. Yeah, you should start the recording, please. Now, if you look at the right-hand side of the map, you see that these units have been closed across the country. But what is most interesting is, of the 12 gigawatt that has been closed, about 2.7 gigawatt has been replaced with new thermal power unit, more advanced. For example, Neveli Thermal Power Station 1 was replaced with 1,000 megawatt new Neveli thermal power plant. Similarly, other plants have been closed and new, more efficient thermal power plants have been constructed. But now they are also converting some of the thermal power plant into non-energy use. For example, a thermal power plant in Assam is being repurposed as a ISRO station. Or the thermal power plant in Bhatinda is being converted into a residential colony. So about 1.4 gigawatt of the 12 gigawatt is being repurposed for non-energy use. But about 2/3 of the capacity, there is no decision. It is in limbo. They do not know what to do with about 2/3 of the capacity. And I'll come back to this issue because this could become a major problem for the country. It is a problem across the world, which is called as keeping the thermal power plant after retirement in as it is status. So that's the first point, that thermal power units are being closed, but only about 1/3 is being repurposed. 2/3 is being kept aside. The second point I want to make is that all the units and plants that are being closed, the plan to set up, there's a limit till which those facilities will be converted into more efficient new facilities. And therefore, there's a visible shift in converting the retired plant into a new efficient thermal power plant. People are thinking about repurposing in other use. Now, if this is the case, how the future looks like? Now, we could take any thumb rule to decide what is the retirement age. We could take 35 years as retirement age. We can take 25 years as retirement age. If you take 25 years as retirement age, which is what the policy of Ministry of Power is, or which is used as the age of thermal power plant in all the financial calculations, then you find that by 2030, we will have to retire about 50,000 megawatt worth of thermal power plant. Even if you take 35 years, then also we will have to retire about 40,000 megawatt by 2030. This is huge capacity that is primed for retirement in the next 7 to 8 years. As you can see, the graph below, we have units which are 50 years old that are still operating. Units of 40, 30 years and above, there are many, many units that are operating. So our fleet is aging, and therefore, irrespective of environment or climate change, we will have large-scale retirement because of techno-economic and commercial reasons. So that's the first point I would like to make, that there is a large fleet which is primed for retirement in the next few years. Now, what is the implications of this retirement? Now, we did a lot of research to understand how much land thermal power plants have, both using thumb rules as well as primary study that we have been doing at the district level under our Just Transition program. And we found that thermal power plant in totality could have anywhere between 1,200 to 1,300 square kilometer of land, which is precisely about the size of National Capital Territory of Delhi. So about 1,20,000 hectare to 1,30,000 hectare land is with thermal power plants. Now, in a 25-year retirement scenario, about 20% of that land will be available in next 10 years, 200 square kilometer land. So we are not talking about few hundred hectares of land that needs to be remediated. First of all, site dismantled, cleaned up and remediated. We are talking about large amount of land in next 10 years, which will be available for remediation and repurposing. So 200 square kilometer land, more than 20,000 hectares land will be available if 40 to 50,000 gigawatt has to be decommissioned. The problem is this, that the ownership is problematic in India. Most of the land has been acquired using Land Acquisition Act, but still there are freehold land and then there are leasehold land. 2/3 of all the land actually is with state government and central government. So state and central government will have a major role to play in terms of land repurposing. The problem is that there will be many cases where the plant owner is different and landowner is different. So plant owner could be a central GENCO, generation company, and the landowner could be state government. Or a plant owner can be a private company and landowner will be state or central government. This duality of ownership will create a lot of problem, as it has created across the world, that we have to be mindful of. The second implication is labor. And we spent a lot of time estimating how many people work in thermal power plant end to end. And our numbers are way above of what people have been projecting. We think anywhere between 800 to 1 million people work in thermal power sector, starting from transportation to waste management to running of thermal power plant, anywhere between 800 to 1 million people, 800,000 to 1 million people. And 70% of them are informal and contractual workers. Only about 30% is departmental or formal contractual workforce. So informality is huge in the sector. Now, under a 25-year scenario, about 2 lakh of these people, workers, will be affected. Some of them will be departmental who can be shifted, but large amount of worker will be contractual and informal. And we are seeing problem already happening at decommissioned plant site, where there is a lot of conflict between the plant as well as and informal and contractual labor on the other side. Last is financial implications. Decommissioning costs are not exactly included in our financial calculation. In fact, decommissioning is not included as part of liability. Unlike coal mining, where closure of coal mine is a liability, and there is an escrow account where money is deposited, or closure of a nuclear site is a liability, where insurance is taken. In leave thermal power plant, in all industries, financial calculation, decommissioning is not something which is explicitly considered. In case of thermal power plant, 10% of the capital cost is considered as salvage value, and the assumption is that salvage value will be sufficient. Our finding is that it is not sufficient, and Manvi will expand on that issue. But we have used thumb rule. We have looked at Badarpur cost. We have looked at Bhatinda cost, and our sense is that it is going to be an expensive proposition. If we really want to do good decommissioning, good remediation, good repurposing, that is going to be expensive. And the cost could be, anywhere between 1.1 lakh crore. In next 10 years, it could be about 25,000 crore rupees that will be required for decommissioning. The question is, how much of this money can be got by selling salvage? Mind you, that in many sites, the plant owner is not the landowner. So they cannot sell the land and get money for for repurposing. The landowner is someone else. So the idea that I can sell the plant and I can sell the land and get the money for decommissioning is not true at large number of sites. The last point is environment. What is the environmental implications? Frankly, we do not understand the total extent of environmental impact of decommissioning because it is a new area for us. We have only global experience and Western experience to learn from. But the issue is very simple, that a plant, thermal power plant, has a lot of toxic material that has to be handled. Plant site remediation has to take place. We have to see whether soil and groundwater has been contaminated or not. And most importantly, what to do with fly ash type. More than 50% of that land would be fly ash disposal pond. And how do we remediate and use that? And therefore, for environment, what kind of regulatory framework would enable smooth decommissioning is very important. But equally important is what kind of expertise are required and what kind of expertise we build over the next few years or decade to decommission thermal power plant, but also other industries. So these were the big questions that we had when we started this research project. And now I will hand it over to Manvi to tell you the findings of our legal and regulatory review. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CD. I'm somehow not the host anymore. If I can just get the sharing rights.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So thank you, CD, for that background and for introducing the context in which we are discussing this. Yes. So hope my slides are visible.
Yes, it is visible.
Yeah. Okay. So at the very core, thermal power generation is a delicensed activity under the Electricity Act 2003. So a company, public or private, can establish, operate and maintain a power generating station. And the only expectation essentially on the technical side is that the grid security concern be maintained. This is the only technical expectation at the time of decommissioning as well. So once the board of directors of a GenCo decide to close, for whatever reason, it could be technical or commercial or even a mandate, say an environmental mandate that has come up, their only job is to intimate CEA about their decision to retire. And unless there is a grid security concern, the power plant closure proceeds and the CEA deletes the plant from the All India Installed Capacity database. There are no regulatory requirements governing the commencement of retirement and closure of a thermal power plant as such. But decommissioning is a concept which goes beyond retirement and withdrawal of a power plant from the grid. It entails a complex set of technical, environmental, social, and economic interventions that ensure that the plant site is cleaned, it's remediated, all the labor-related issues are resolved, and then the plant site, either the plant is repurposed for the next possible use, or the plant site is redeveloped for any energy or non-energy purpose. So it is crucial, like CP said, to assess if the requirements and resources for this just decommissioning are provided by the framework that we have in terms of our laws and regulations and policies. So to begin with, as far as environment is concerned, there are no laws that mandate cleanup and remediation works in a time-bound manner. All the relevant laws are essentially silent on decommissioning, and there are no regulatory requirements for any kind of decommissioning planning or action to be taken up by a power plant site. If a generation company decides not to dismantle and remediate a site, they only have to maintain their environmental conditions as per the EC, and they can continue to remain like that. There's no requirement in the law for them to dismantle and remediate. Meanwhile, if a power plant owner does decide to dismantle, a number of laws and regulations kick in, which necessitate multiple permits and clearances to be procured from local authorities or pollution control boards. And the CPCB's draft environmental guidelines for decommissioning coal and lignite-fired power plant, which was published in July 2021, lists all these requirements. Like I mentioned, what are these requirements? The draft guidelines suggests that an EIA be undertaken and an environmental management plan be developed, but this is still a draft and it's not a mandate yet. New CTO needs to be procured, or the existing one needs to be modified under the Air and Water Act. There are compliances to be met with respect to hazardous waste rules, fly ash notifications, C&D waste management, as well as health and safety related laws that come in, and all of these require different kinds of permits and clearances. There is no requirement as of now on a contamination study at any stage, whether it is before, after, or during the entire cleanup and remediation process. As far as redevelopment and repurposing is concerned, the site has to go through an EIA study and a new EC has to be procured from the ministry if the repurposed sector essentially falls within the EIA notification of 2006. If it doesn't fall within that notification, only a consent to establish and operate from SPCB would be required. As far as land is concerned, again, like CB said, that it's a complex kind of domain where there are freehold, leasehold lands that power plants are built on. From what we saw in terms of the declarations which are listed in the assets listed in power plant balance sheets, 60 to 100% of this land is freehold land. But there is substantial leasehold land which exists, and there is substantial leasehold, forest land, on which power plants are operating. As of now, land for power plants are mainly acquired through the Land Acquisition Act and the Forest Conservation Act, both of which are silent on the requirements of remediation and redevelopment at the time of decommissioning. There are 2-3 concerns that emerge in this context. Now, a lot of the freehold land and the leasehold land is ultimately government owned, whether it is central government or state government. And there is no guidance or any kind of formal mechanism that exists that can help decide repurposing and redevelopment in an efficient manner. This creates a risk of delayed decisions and perhaps even suboptimal decisions, which further then would delay repurposing of the land and decontamination of the land itself. Also, lease contracts do not provide clarity on the condition in which the land has to be returned to the original owner. Typically, it says that it has to be regrassed, or sometimes it says that it has to be sent back in a good condition, which is not an adequate clarification and can lead to disputes, especially if the owner is government and the power plant owner is a private sector company. For freehold private sector land, there is a high risk of sites remaining as it is, because especially if decommissioning is not mandated and the financial viability concern is not addressed. In case of forest lands, repurposing and redevelopment would entail new approvals, and majority of this may go back to the forest department. And again, there is no clarity on the state in which this land will be returned back to the forest department. As far as labor is concerned, India has initiated the process of labor law reforms, and there is an attempt to strengthen the mechanisms for protecting labor rights and providing social security. But overall, the existing laws and even the upcoming codes, they're not designed for dealing with large-scale closure of industrial facilities. The Industrial Dispute Act of 1947 is the crucial act here as far as compensation framework for in case of labor retrenchment is concerned. And typically this compensation is average pay for 15 days for every year of continuous service. And it is much less in case an undertaking is closed due to unavoidable scenarios, but financial difficulties do not come under unavoidable scenarios. There are state level variations, though a number of states have adopted the same framework as the central law, but Jharkhand has substantially higher compensation suggested, or equivalent to 3 months of average pay for every year of continuous service. Overall, the ID Act really doesn't get into the requirements of a just transition of workforce as such. But the new Industrial Relations Code, which is yet to be implemented, provides a much broader framework for protecting the rights of workers. It does provide for constitution of a negotiating union, of reskilling funds being created, and also provides for statutory benefits for fixed term employees. But yeah, overall, as far as the social security mechanism in the country is concerned, there isn't adequate cover, especially in case of workers who are in the informal sector or contractual in nature. The mechanism remains kind of weak and inadequate, and we see that in the Contract Labor Act, which provides for the broad conditions under which contract labor is employed. I'm so sorry. But it's not really designed for providing any kind of social security or compensation or financial assistance for reskilling or re-employment for this worker category. The new Social Security Code of 2020, which is being implemented gradually, does propose some positive changes. As in, it extends the social security to all employees in organized and unorganized sectors. It aims to kind of register all workers on an online portal, and it demarcates welfare schemes from under central and state governments. It also proposes setting up of a career center for providing vocational training, career counseling, and guidance for self-employed. So various elements of just transition are getting reflected here. But still, a dedicated legal framework is needed, which kind of bridges the gap between the social security which exists within the framework, within the legal frameworks in a country, and what is additionally required in case of large-scale retrenchments that accompany a sector-wide transition, which is currently obviously not there. As far as funding is concerned, CV's elaborated on the need for looking at it closely, in the sense that the regulations currently do not really explicitly talk about decommissioning costs while doing the tariff calculations. And the reliance is on the salvage value of the plant, which is 10% of the capital cost, to ultimately meet this expense. But we see that in both India's experience as well as global experience that this may not be adequate. The present regulations, under the way the tariff regulations are drafted, costs can be recovered if dismantling and cleanup and remediation works are mandated under a new law or are mandated through amendment in any law. And then it would qualify to be considered as change in law, and those tariffs can then be recovered through those costs can be recovered through tariffs. Now, there is limited understanding on this issue so far, as CV also said, and so a lot of research and it needs to go into to kind of figure out what that decommissioning cost essentially implies. And then identifying it as a liability. That is a very crucial concern. Otherwise, especially for merchant power plants, this will never get accounted for. Given this background, I think it is important to look at the experiences of some of the countries globally and what they have done and what they had to go through in the process of this decarbonization of power generation. A lot of capacity has been decommissioned since 2000. We see that 432.5 gigawatt capacity globally has retired in the past 2 decades. And this has been gradually increasing if you look at every 5-year interval. Now, majority of this retired capacity is located in the US and China. 33% in the US, 27% in China, 7% in UK, 6% in Germany, 4% in India, and 2% in Canada. So these are the kind of leading countries where power plants have been retired for various reasons, ranging from techno-economic reasons, pure economic reasons, as in competition from renewable plants, and also due to explicit climate mitigation action, especially in Europe. These retired plants have met with different kind of fates, essentially. Mostly in China and India, we see that a lot of these older units that are retired are replaced with new units, though the pace of it is now declining. In US, what is very commonly seen is there are a lot of plants that are abandoned, and waiting further action because of, again, lack of mandates and financial viability concerns. In the global north, we see Europe and Canada, we see a lot of instances of power plants being repurposed for energy or non-energy related uses, or even instances of power plants dismantled for further action, for energy and non-energy uses. Now, we have looked at 4 countries broadly: US, Canada, UK, and Germany, to see what happened in detail. But I'll just jump to the lessons here and talk about them a little bit, and you can look at the report too for the detailed case study. But one thing which is very clear is that preparing in advance is very important. US is undertaking a range of actions now to deal with the issues pertaining to coal plant closures, but these have kind of been inadequate against the pace and scale at which the closures actually took place. Cleanup and remediation, it needs to be mandated by laws and not just summarized in guidance notes. We see this in US, where the EPA had essentially also come out with kind of a fact sheet which put together the things that power plants need to do at the time of decommissioning. But it was inadequate in pushing people to do that. And then finally, states like Montana had to come out with explicit laws which mandated submission of plans, which mandated which created liabilities and gave timeline for action very explicitly. It is very, very important to provide adequate financing for cleanup and remediation. In the past decade, a number of states in US that have regulated markets have come out with laws that allow recovery of decommissioning costs through the tariffs. What is important here is that these laws are designed to protect the interest of both the power plant owner and the consumers, in the sense that it explicitly defines the kind of the costs that can be recovered through the tariffs and that cannot be recovered. So essentially, decontamination which happens through the fault of the power plant owner for not following environmental regulation would not be allowed, but the genuine costs are allowed. In Europe also, we see that the laws that came up for coal closure, whether in Germany or Finland, they also include a mechanism for paying the power companies both as a compensation for early closure, as well as some financial support for remediation and repurposing. As far as just transition action is concerned, global experience is very clear that a proactive role of government in this becomes very important. There's a limit to what generation companies can do in this context. So dedicated laws and frameworks are being created across central, state, and even local government level to support just transition of workforce and communities. There is a prioritization we see for repurposing and redevelopment in the sense that guidance and incentives for brownfield area development is very important in this context because land is a limited resource and it is explicitly acknowledged across the guidances that are available in say countries like Canada or UK. And these mechanisms also kind of identify the funding support that companies can look at for repurposing. In some cases, not all. Finally, legal frameworks guiding early closures of power plants are important in case of prioritization of climate action. Of course, this is not the context that we are discussing for India in this meeting, but there are several European countries, like I said, who have enacted laws not just to strengthen climate action, but also to avoid litigations with coal companies and provide kind of an assurance of support to workers and communities. With that background and the the global experience and the India mapping, there are some clear kind of action plans that we have identified from our end. One is that building the legal requirement for decommissioning is very important. This can either be achieved through amendment in an existing law, for instance, an amendment in EIA notification or change in compliance conditions of the EC, wherein you could have the new plans draft a decommissioning plan as a part of their EIA study and the environment management plan. And for existing plans, submission of this plan can be mandated well before a retirement date. Typically, we see in US that it's 5 years before retirement, that's one option of amending laws. Or you could have a new law enacted, which looks at decommissioning of industries and power plant, to consolidate all environment-related provisions and remove the multiplicity of clearances and permits that are required at present. This law could then provide a clear timeline for decommissioning. It could identify a procedure for development and approval of these decommissioning plans, as well as create a framework of a single window kind of permit for dismantling works. Also build a framework for compliance reporting and verification and certification, as well as an integrated consent and clearance for repurposing, which typically emerges as a new kind of requirement. Also required is a certification and accreditation process for decommissioning companies, because in US, in countries where the thermal power capacity is large, say US, Canada, China, India, there is an emergence of a new specialized kind of firms who are providing services with respect to decommissioning of power plants itself. So it is important to define criteria for their operations. On the land front, building mechanisms that enable efficient decisions for land becomes very important. There needs to be a clear policy on land repurposing with very adequate incentives on brownfield area use for redevelopment work. Empowered committees need to be set up at central and state government levels for taking the repurposing decision in an efficient and objective manner. This is very crucial because remediation also is very closely linked to repurposing decision. And the land acts need to specify dismantling and remediation standards very clearly, because otherwise conflicts in case of leasehold lands are likely to emerge. There needs to be a mechanism for just transition of workforce, which this could be either through revision of existing labor laws and codes from a just transition perspective, or the dedicated decommissioning law can be framed, which also has this element of just transition built in. A very clear just transition policy needs to be defined, and just transition fund needs to be created from multiple sources: government, private, philanthropic, etc. district level just transition planning needs to be prioritized, because we see that typically there are 20 to 25 districts in this country where coal mining, coal power generation, and also coal dependent industries all coexist. So it will not just be a question of a thermal power sector decommissioning, but also the mine closure and industry transition as well. So an integrated approach on planning from a just transition perspective at district level for India makes a lot of sense. For PSUs especially, the human resource policy, it needs to be made more comprehensive to deal with the transfers, re-employment, reskilling, and worker rehabilitation issues that emerge at the time of decommissioning of thermal power plant. And lastly, the financial framework to fund decommissioning needs to be clarified for both the regulated market and the small merchant market that exists in India. There are various ways of doing it. What we suggest here in our report is that the liability of the GENCO for decommissioning plant needs to be very clearly established, which can happen through a dedicated law or amendment in existing law. And then a corpus fund can be set up for decommissioning, similar to the kind of escrow account mechanism that exists in case of coal mine closures to deal with this. And then an institutional setup needs to be created both at essentially at central level for administering this fund. So whether it is approval of the plans, to collection of funds, to administering the funds, and then giving final clearance, all of this can be taken up by one institution at the central level. And for all companies, public, private, merchant, there needs to be a mandate to disclose the decommissioning cost as a liability in the financial books. For merchant power plants, also to ensure that decommissioning costs are included in the cost of doing business, a mechanism can be thought through. A certain amount of fund can be held in an escrow account as a surety for decommissioning, and it can be reimbursed later. Another concern is that of bankruptcy and what happens in case of bankruptcy. So very prudent approach and thought through approach is needed, where this issue of decommissioning post bankruptcy is addressed more carefully. So those are the broad issues that we have highlighted in our report. CV, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Manvi, for this comprehensive presentation. It was important for us to give you the sense of the scope of this report, and I'll encourage you that you all should read this report. Manvi, if you can release the report so that we all can see where the report is. There is no print version of the report, so it will be available on our website. The report is available on our website. You can download the report. The scope is vast, but also this report tells you what is the next step. What are the next steps that we need to take in terms of looking at this issue in a much more comprehensive fashion. We have given our recommendations in all the aspects, but we think a lot more work is required. A lot more consultation is required within the government, civil society, research institution, private sector, industry, to see that we get a comprehensive framework for a really smooth and decommissioning and repurposing, which is going to be very, very important. Now, with having said that, this report will be available on our website, and you can access this report from there. Let me now invite Mr. D.V. Lakshmipati, who is CGM of Badapur Thermal Power Plant. And we got Mr. Lakshmipati simply because Badapur is one of those plants which is looking for repurposing other than as an industry plant. The fly ash unit is being converted into an eco park, and the site is being thought through what will happen to the site. We would like to understand his experience of decommissioning Badapur Thermal Power Plant, and therefore I'll request Mr. Lakshmipati for his remarks. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good afternoon to all. And thank you, CD, for giving me this opportunity. Now, decommissioning of thermal plants would increase in the days to come, as you have already detailed in your presentation and in your initial talk also. Therefore, today's topic is very relevant, I feel. And at the outset, I would like to brief on the decommissioning activities that have been taken place at Badarpur Thermal Power Plant, and also express the legal and regulatory changes that would enable smooth execution of the decommissioning activities properly. Btps had, I'll first initially brief about the background of the Btps and then go into the other aspects. Btps had an installed capacity of 705 megawatts comprising of 3 units of 95 megawatts in stage 1, which were commissioned between 1973 to 1975, and 2 units of 210 megawatts in stage 2, commissioned in 1980 and 1982. The original ownership of NTPC Badarpur was vested with Government of India and was operated and maintained by CEA till March 1978. From April 1st, 1978, the management was transferred to NTPC, and NTPC operated and maintained the station up to 31st March 2006 on an annual management fee basis. Subsequently, on June 1st, 2006, through a gazette notification, the ownership of the station was transferred to NTPC. Along with the land, the assets were transferred to NTPC, but the land was given on lease for a period of 50 years on a charges of about 10% of the asset value of the land, which was finalized. Then the land was about 517 hectares, I would say, plant area coming to about 99.82 hectares, township area around 59.26 hectares, and ASDEC area of 358 hectares. 100% of the power from NTPC Badarpur was allocated to Delhi. And after entrusting the management of this plant to NTPC in 1978, the station's PLF was improved from 32% to almost 89.12% in the year 2008-9. Since then, BTPS generation started. After that, the BTPS generation started to fall, mainly due to the low scheduling of power due to high cost of generation and implementation of the graded response action plan during winter months of October to March. Now, with this, after interesting, accordingly, the unit 1 and 2, because of this graded action plan, it was intimated that we should close down, or rather we should not operate the units 1, 2, and 3. From October 2018, we stopped unit 1, and September and October 2015, we stopped unit 2 and 3. Now, as per the gazette notification of MOEF and CC on 7/12/2015, old units have been given 2 years to achieve the revised norms of 100 mg per nm cube. However, since 2008, DPCC had been requesting NTPC to bring the SPM levels to below 50 mg per nm cube. Now, actions were taken on that, and in February 2016, NTPC informed that the emissions of stage 2 units have already been brought down below 50 mg per nm cube, and stage 1 units also can be brought down if CERC permits R&M expenditure. During the meeting called by Parliamentary Standing Committee on Science and Technology, Environment and Forest with regard to environmental pollution in Delhi, as decided in this meeting, the overall interest of the, as decided in the overall interest of reducing the pollution levels in Delhi, NTPC agreed to consider shutting down the BTPS. Further, during the meeting with Environment Pollution Prevention and Control Authority and Honorable Lieutenant Governor of Delhi held in May 2017, BTPS has planned to close down, as soon as Tughlakabad Interstate 400 kV substation being constructed by PGCL is commissioned. And accordingly, it was decided that the 200 kV switchyard, which was in the control of NTPC, should be taken over by TTL at the book value, and handing over of the land was to be done to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Then further funding of there is a school, Kendriya Vidya School in Btps land, and the funding of the school was to be decided by the Ministry of Human Resource Development. There is also a private school in the premises, and it was decided that it will continue to operate. And as you already told, decision with regard to converting the Aztec area of 358 hectares into Eco Park was taken. Accordingly, from May 2017, NTPC had internally started planning for closure of Btps after June 2018. Further, as per Environment Pollution Prevention and Control Authority's order, the running of unit number 4 and 5 of Btps, 1, 2, and 3, I has already told you that it was shut down. It was not in operation. 4 and 5 also was taken out of bar on 15/10/2018. Accordingly, the consent to operate was limited up to 15 October 2018 by DPCC. Then, so there could be instances when generator is able to bring down the emission levels below the norms, but still considering the broader perspective of the society and people at large, the government can insist for closure of the plant. As you already told that it could be a generator's decision also, or in some cases it could be the government's intervention for the closure of the plant. Further, in my perspective, in future, considering the emerging renewable energy technologies, and that too, if with the renewable energy technologies, we are able to get the round-the-clock power, as hydrogen and other aspects are building up. With that, if we are able to get the round-the-clock power from the renewable energy sources, this could be more decommissioning of the thermal plants could be more aggressive. And we have, as you already detailed, that even particularly in Germany, in spite of all these things, they have taken decisions to close down the thermal plants on the climate change conditions itself. Now I'll talk about slightly briefly about the process of dismantling, which has been decommissioning, which has been done at Badarpur. Now this dismantling of power plant includes segregation of assets for scrap assets that can be refurbished, or unused inventory which can be used in other power plants, and disposal of hazardous items. These are the main components we can say. It also involves sorting of stores inventory, because by the time you're really decommissioning the plant, you will have spares inventory at various conditions. So accordingly, you need to sort out them and use and you adopt diverse strategies for disposal of this spares inventory as per their book value. Then accordingly, the assets and inventory that are useful in other plants of NTPC, because you have generators who are standalone, who have generators who are having large capacities spread across various, and especially if I speak about NTPC, we have so many fleets of units operating. So we have ample scope of diverting this inventory to other plants. So first we have given preference to that. And second was that if the spares can be disposed of separately through auctions. And these things have been identified, and these have been prepared as an exclusion list. Then next what we did is the entire plant and machinery of the items, excluding this list, was has been divided into 10 segments. And then the valuation of the same was got done through Ferro Scrap Nikam Limited. Then the value of each segment has been equally divided at the rate of 10% of the total value. The purpose of this is that rather the 10 segments which have been identified also is such a way that the infrastructure of the existing plant, like water supply and electricity, are affected least during the dismantling, so that they are available till the major portion of the time. Then all these items included in each segment are clearly marked and listed in the for the inspection by the prospective parties before the auction, and subsequently for the disposal to the buyer during decommissioning. So this process was adopted, and the payment process also we have ensured that they make the payments at least within 24 months, whereas the material is decommissioned and removed from the site within 36 months. Then the auction was conducted through MSTC, and all the stakeholders, statutory bodies, district administrations were informed about the effective date from which the permanent stoppage of operations of the plant would be done. It was also published in the local as well as the national level papers about the permanent stoppage of the operations of the plant. Then factory license was surrendered to the Chief Inspector of Factories, Government of NCT. The buyer registered as principal employer under CLRA and BOCW Act. Accordingly, all the labor-related statutory compliances are with the buyer. Further, what we did is the buyer would be responsible for the compliance of all the statutory regulations like adhering to the air, water, disposal of hazardous waste, demolition norms, safety during decommissioning activities. However, since safety being the first and foremost factor considered for such hazardous and risky works, an initiative was taken by NTPC to create a new compendium of SOPs, guidelines and management procedures for carrying out the entire decommissioning and dismantling works. The guidelines were prepared through detailed deliberations based on experience of our team and were reviewed in detail and then formalized after due approvals. Now, coming to each aspect that you have highlighted in your presentation and the points that you raised, if you discuss about the land aspect of it, the land aspect, as per land aspect, the Badarpur is concerned, it was given on lease to NTPC. So we have only one option of returning back the land to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, which we are doing it. As far as ASDAC is concerned, there was a decision from the ministry as well as NTPC also that the ASDAC will be converted into a beautiful man-made eco park, which is in the process, which we are doing it. So these are the, as far as Badarpur is concerned, I'm addressing only about the Badarpur part of it. The land aspect has been dealt in this fashion. When I talk about the environmental aspects, now all the hazardous waste like batteries, lube oil, transformer oil, e-waste, resins are disposed of by NTPC separately to the agencies who have authorized license for handling such materials. So what we did is from the plant, we have identified such type of materials and we have disposed it off in that fashion. So if you see the hazardous material management in any thermal plant, these are the things which are on a continuous basis also handled. It's not that only during the decommissioning we will be handling such hazardous material. During the operation of the plant also, we are handling the hazardous material disposal. But definitely when we are decommissioning, there could be certain material, additional material in a larger volumes, which would be hazardous material, which would be coming out of the plant and which needs to be addressed properly. Now, demolition of the plant has been done without the use of any blasting material here. Even chimney has been demolished by the mechanical process of cutting the root and then building it. You must have seen the twin towers which have been demolished in Noida. So that was collapsing the towers into the same location, whereas this is because we have adequate land available at the site, we have just cut and tilted it into the and demolished it. Now, water cannon spray system have been used for dust suppression during the demolition of the plant buildings. Here also the plant building.
Can I just intervene for a minute?
Yes, sir.
Can you give us some idea about the legal processes you followed? We understand that a lot of precautions were taken by NTPC in doing this. Can you give us some idea about all the regulations that you had to go through and permissions that you had to take to do this?
I think I'll be covering in my subsequent things. This I'm just detailing you out. When I said that hazardous material, in fact, this we have handled ourselves. That's what I'm trying to say. There is no legal process in this. As per the legal process only, the way hazardous material has to be disposed of, we have disposed of in the same fashion. Then whatever regulation says for the dust suppression systems, we have all followed that. No burning of material was done. All licenses, now I come to when you asked about this, let me use this, like all useful chemicals and unused gas cylinders have been transferred to other plants for its proper utilization. Then all licenses issued for storage of use of critical chemicals and gases like chlorine, hydrogen, diesel, fuel oil, etc. have been surrendered to the Petroleum Explosive Safety Organization. Then no damage to any stormwater drain has been done. If you talk about water, actually we are not polluting any water. In fact, we have stopped. We used to take water and there was no discharge. Majority of our NTPC plants, they are all zero discharge. So there is no discharge which goes into any of the water bodies. And here whatever water can flow through the plant is only the stormwater water. So we are not disturbed anything of that. So waterfront, there is no disturbance. Air front, if you talk, air front is the demolition, Construction and Demolition Act is there in the DPCC. As per that guidelines, you have to ensure the demolition of the buildings and other things in the plant that we are ensuring. So the asset and only thing comes is the ASTEC. If you talk about ASTEC, there is procedure for closure of ASTECs also already existing in place. So one of the guidelines for the closure of ASTEC is that covering it with good earth and green plantation, which we are, instead of limiting only to that extent, we are going for the development of an eco park here. So this is as far as environment is concerned, this is the things that goes through it. Then it comes to the labor aspects. All stakeholders, including employees, contracting agencies, statutory authorities, state and police administration, schools, shopkeepers were informed in writing in advance regarding decision for closure of Btps. Open house communication meetings were organized for briefing all employees. Union association representatives were taken into confidence with continuous meetings and communications. Employees were transferred as per their order of preference for relocation to other NTPC projects in station. Differently abled employees were given choice for relocation to NTPC projects of NCR. This is with respect to the NTPC employees. When it comes to the contract labor, action plan was checked out for tapering the deployment of contract labor to have only minimum number of contract labor as per the requirement. Facilitation centers were opened for contract labor for availing their statutory benefits like Provident Fund and ESI. Payment of enrichment benefits to all contract labor were ensured through the contracting agencies. Special medical board was constituted to consider the medical requirement of employees, and closure permission was obtained from appropriate government as per the section 25 of the Industrial Dispute Act 1947. Now coming to the commercial and generating companies aspects perspective of it, the losses which a company would incur on account of this decommissioning or non-operation of the units would be: one is in Badarpur, we have faced the capacity charges during in-operation period till the commencement of the decommissioning. There was certain period in which we were given instructions not to operate the plant, but a decommissioning decision was not taken. During that period, we did not get the capacity charges, and there was unrealized depreciation also in this. And subsequently, if you see, there is an equity locked in the, once the decommissioning is identified, till the entire decommissioning process is completed, there would be certain amount of equity which is locked into the plant, and return on equity would be one of the loss which we would be incurring on that. Then salvage value, as Manvi also explained, that salvage value is be one of the aspects which is figuring out in the losses. Apart from these things, expenses towards the land, manpower, electricity, water, security, etc., during the period of decommissioning would be the loss. Now, if I figure all these things as losses, what would be my income? My income would be the revenue available, only net realizable value of the asset. That is, whatever inventory or scrap after excluding the expenses towards the dismantling and disposal of the assets, whatever revenue I get, that is the only revenue I get. Now, question is, one of the aspects which arises is, would this revenue be equivalent to the losses, or would it be more, or would it be less? Right now, I will not be able to give that figure, but there is no provision in the PPA with regard to compensation for decommissioning. Presently, the issue with regard to capacity charges for the period from February 16 to October 18, which I told you earlier, and unrealized depreciation are being taken up with CRC under change of law. But considering the increasing number of aged power plants, which would be an increasing trend, a clear directive from CRC with regard to compensation of inoperation of any unit would be required. This is one of the guidelines which would be required. Now, I would like to further say that.
Can you please now wrap it up quickly, because we have analysts. Yeah.
Just a minute, I'll wrap it up. Thus, realized revenue may not compensate for the losses. Therefore, incorporation of suitable provisions by CRC in the tariff would be required, similar to the tariff adoption. Here, what we say is, in case there is a net gain after the entire figures are submitted to the CRC, in case there is a net gain, mechanism of compensation, a mechanism of sharing of the net gain can be worked out. In case there is a loss, they can work out for the mechanism for sharing of the loss, and these provisions can be done. So from Badarpur's perspective, this is the point I would like to explain. But I have some more points. If you want, I can continue. Otherwise,
We can do that in Q&A. If you are there for the Q&A session, I think there is a lot of question that is already there. People have asked you.
Okay. Then finally, I would like to thank iFOREST for giving this opportunity to brief about the topic. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Now, may I request, I think Mr. Nazimuddin from CPCB is there, Central Pollution Control Board. And may I request Nazim for his comments on what he has heard so far and how CPCB is looking at decommissioning of thermal power plant. Nazim?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chandbhushan. I think first, I think iFOREST and the applicant in the NGT case related to decommissioning very well know, and other plants are also aware that we have prepared a draft guidelines for decommissioning. And on those draft guidelines, we have received further comments from the applicant, Mr. Dharmesh Shah, as well as iFOREST. And these guidelines, finalization of these guidelines got delayed due to superannuation of the concerned officer, and there was a gap of several months in which the new officer could not be replaced. Now, I think these guidelines, I suppose these can be the suggestions which have come to us can be incorporated within this, I think, October month. And we will also go through the latest report of the iFOREST, and if something new besides the comments received earlier is there, we will also consider that into finalization of the draft report. And I think the main concerns related to decommissioning of the power plants are the ash stored in the ash ponds, and demolition work and the related pollution, and basically the hazardous waste which has to be disposed of. So as far as hazardous waste and demolition waste is concerned, these are already governed by the concerned rules, related rules. And one recent development has taken place that for ash, regarding ash, there is an ash notification of 31st December 2021, which requires a guidelines for regarding design of ash ponds as well as design and maintenance of ash pond. So these guidelines are to be prepared by CPCB in consultation with CEA. So CEA has brought out a draft guidelines for that purpose. And in these guidelines, a special para has been added that the annual certification of operational ash pond in terms of safety and maintenance, etc., is to be done. But we have added the para that the similar annual certification regarding safety and maintenance will also be done for the closed ash pond. So this is as regard as the operational power plant having closed ash ponds, but this will definitely be extended to the abandoned ash ponds of a decommissioned power plant through this by mentioning especially this in the guidelines itself. But that special para has already been incorporated, that the similar annual certification will be done for the closed ash ponds also. So this is a recent development. This is all I want to prize.
Thank you, Nazim, because I had sent the report, the advanced copy of report to CPCB, and I must say that we got a very positive response from the member secretary and as well as other officers at CPCB, because they understood the kind of challenge they will face as a regulator when decommissioning happens. So we have also sent our comments to the guideline, but with this report, a lot more things can be added to that comment as well. But CPCB is open to receiving comment on the environmental guideline. That I would like to stress here. So any one of you, if you feel that you have certain point to make to CPCB on the new guideline they're coming out on decommissioning of thermal power plant, it would be important that you send it to them. Now, so this was, the broad view from our research, a view that NTPC provided, what CPCB is thinking about. They are very focused on getting the guidelines out. Now, I will request all the panel members to come on board. We have about 50 minutes of panel discussion and Q&A. And therefore, I'll request all of you to keep your initial comments short because there are a number of questions that people have already asked. I'll start with Dharmesh because Dharmesh and Ritvik have played a very important role in bringing a case in National Green Tribunal on decommissioning of thermal power plant. Dharmesh, a short remark from you because we have really documented this case extensively in the report, but your short important point that you would like to make, and then we will ask questions from you. Dharmesh, please.
Thank you, iFOREST and Mr. Chandrabhushan and Manvi. Just to kind of apologize on behalf of Ritvik, he won't be available because the case is going on in the NGT and he's required there. I was hoping to join, but unfortunately, he won't be free by the time this event gets over. It's an important issue and perhaps the least understood. I can share my experience as a petitioner in the case, but the idea was when we identified the issue of decommissioning, it was when the Naval Lignite Corporation announced the decommissioning of one of its units, which you mentioned, I think, in your talk, CB. It got us curious, what exactly does decommissioning process look like? So we began looking at the various components of the typical power plant, the fate of the power plant once it's dismantled. We looked at bidding contracts and processes that follow when the units are decommissioned. And we learned that it was not as simple as just pulling the plug, and in the context of regulations, decommissioning actually requires minimal paperwork. As Manvi mentioned, it's basically the company board of directors of the company has to just declare the decommissioning, and then they have to intimate the CEA, and then it is deleted from the installed capacity database. The biggest issue that we faced was the Indian regulations do not demand any environmental and social impact assessment of decommissioning, and that's what we argued, in the court, that this is a very important issue that requires some law, some kind of guidance from the government. There are several toxic components, in a typical power plant, and when we looked at international experiences, we came across a host of different chemicals and toxic substances, hazardous substances that were being used in a typical power plant: asbestos, PCBs, coal ash, mercury, arsenic. All these things factored in the list of chemicals and hazardous substances in a typical power plant. Now, only one official document of the MOEF, which is on contaminated sites remediation, which was released by MOEF in 2015-16, that lists lead, PCB, and asbestos and arsenic as the chemicals of concern with regard to thermal power plants. However, there was no substantial help to kind of make a case for decommission. This was not enough to kind of guide the process of decommissioning. So we looked at international best practices. We looked at the US EPA. I think Manvi mentioned that there's a guidance document on decommissioning, and that's where we discovered that a lot of chemicals of concern were there, and that CA and CPCB and regulators like CA and CPCB who were engaged in the decommissioning process were not looking at it. So that's why the whole, the decommissioning trend, in a way, we saw that it had opened up a dismantling and reclamation kind of market. A lot of e-auction companies like M Junction and MSTC were involved in this, but there were no SOPs, like Mr. Lakshmipati was talking about it. But it is basically at the mercy of the plant operator and the bidding agencies. There's no SOP on what should be done. So each plant operator follows his own methodology of dismantling, and where these hazardous substances go is not very clear. Is there a connection? Are they linked to a hazardous waste disposal facility? Where do these things go? How are they handled? that thing is not in public domain, which is what we need. So I think I'll end there because all the other things were already raised earlier. One more point on the issue of Badarpur and Rajghat and all these power plants which have been repurposed. And from what I hear from the initial presentation was 1.4 gigawatts is going to be used for non-energy purposes. And if these are things that are going to be converted into parks and solar parks and recreation areas and residential areas, then deep remediation is required. You cannot just make a park or a residential colony on an ash dump. Ash dumps are hazardous. Ash dumps are toxic. So if we don't have law, then we need to come up with laws on remediation of ash dumps. But ash dumps have long-term health and public health and environmental implications. So we need to look at a long-term remediation plan for these sites. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dharmesh. There are a few questions which we will come back to you in the end. I think Girish has joined us and he has some other things to do. So Namita, I just want to apologize to you. I'll ask Girish to come first and then I'll come back to you. So Girish, your intervention on financial aspect as well as global experience. You did a paper looking at financing of decommissioning. And what did you find in that paper? Whether that salvage value is sufficient? One of the points we found in our report is land owner are not always the plant owners. So selling of land is not the option in all the cases. And therefore that money might not be available. So your intervention in terms of what you got from your global review and your financial paper. Girish.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here. Thank you, Chandra and Manvi, for inviting me. Just a kind of a brief introduction. So I'm a researcher, so you're going to get a very different perspective. I'm an economist. And I just moved to Oxford from Stanford, and so apologize that I have some time constraints here. But one thing I wanted to highlight, and I kind of heard the last part of the presentation, and our analysis in part was actually based on Badarpur. So there is this discussion around decommissioning and decommissioning of coal plants that are at the end of their life. But there is potentially an economic rationale for decommissioning of coal plants that are, young, because I think that all connects to the carbon budget we have, and there is increasing evidence that we don't need any more coal, because we can pretty much meet a lot of our energy demand using renewables and battery storage. And so there are multiple papers, by the way, Chandra. So I'll just perhaps try to touch upon all of them very quickly. In one of our papers, we, for example, showed that at this point, and this was done a couple of years ago, if you look at just the cost of renewables, and they're being so cheap now, and just comparing them to the cost of power generation from coal, half of the coal power capacity in India is potentially uneconomic and therefore should not be used at all. So about 100 gigawatts of coal plants that could be shut down. That obviously is controversial, but that's one of the findings, and from a pure economic sense. The second thing that I wanted to talk about, which perhaps was discussed before, is when we're looking at decommissioning of coal plants, there is this whole aspect around repurposing of coal plants, and I kind of heard a little bit about converting Badarpur and Rajghat into perhaps for public usage. But I come from a power sector background, so we were looking at can we use the existing coal power plants and convert them to something else, or the word is repurposing, and that way you kind of in a way get away from all these questions around environmentally, how do you deal with that, because you just go from one power plant to the next one. So we kind of developed this cost benefit framework for repurposing existing coal power plants into solar battery storage and something called synchronous condensers. And we applied it to a representative coal plant. Actually, it was we got some data for the Badapur coal plant, so we were able to do some analysis, and I'm happy to share numbers later. But the high-level messaging is that the findings revealed a pretty strong economic rationale for repurposing, taking existing coal power plants for and converting them into renewable power plants. And you can actually quantify the benefits. You can see how the benefits compare to the cost of decommissioning, and we can go into details of that. But the key message here is that the benefits do exceed the cost. The other aspect of this is that when you do repurposing, some of the net benefits, which is gross benefits minus cost of decommissioning, can be perhaps used to further make a business case for investment in renewables, and therefore kind of move towards a green growth trajectory. So that's number one thing I want to talk about. The number two thing I want to talk about is there is, as Chandra was asking me about the international experiences. So there's a kind of pretty clear rationale internationally and kind of a justification for doing more green investments and kind of less of brown investments, which in the sense means that you retire coal plants early. And there is enough mobilization, I would say, of financing from an international perspective. And there are schemes that are being put together over the last few years through the World Bank, through the climate investment funds. Some of the regional ones are the energy transition mechanism of the ADB, where their discussion around providing concessional finance for closures of these coal plants and converting them to renewable plants. And this concessional finance could come directly from the multilateral development banks, like the World Bank or the ADB, but they could also come from bilateral institutions. And there's a framework that's been put together called the Just Energy Transition Platform, because multiple countries are coming together, and one of the applications of this platform is in South Africa. South Africa already is raising money. Indonesia is raising money, and the question is, what can India do? And this is starting to get connected to the international carbon markets. So that was my message too, and happy to provide more details on that as well. And the message 3, which is my final message, is that in our studies, whether it's for retirement or for retirement and repurposing, we are finding a strong economic case based on just the economic analysis. But I do want to highlight that it's not an easy problem, and many of you are looking at this. And there are system level and political economy related issues that need to be worked out in the process, given there are so many competing interests. And we kind of started to look at that as part of our earlier work, but that's where the on-ground work becomes very, very important, despite the case, an economic case for this. So I'll stop here and happy to take questions if they come up in the process.
Thanks, Girish. Just one question that, we did review some of your papers. Now, one of the things that we found, and maybe you could answer that, is that the assessment of workers, okay, and the cost in terms of, transition of communities is something that is, first of all, it's difficult to estimate. But is there any effort being done? It's very, quite easy to look at the cost of formal worker. They are put as part of the balance sheet. The retirement benefits is assured. In case of Badapur, they were transferred to some other place. But how do we deal with the economics of community loss and community transition, as well as that of informal worker? Are there some work that is happening in that sphere?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think when we looked at, and it's part of our paper, when we looked at the costs of decommissioning, so we did look at direct costs, right, which has to do with, as you said, employee costs or environmental regulation related cost, or what does it cost to demolish the plant, or Even what does it cost to remove the coal combustion residuals, clean up of coal storage areas? So those are direct costs, right? But we did look at indirect costs, right? And what you're talking about are part of indirect costs, right? Maybe unanticipated environmental costs or local, the one thing you did not raise was local tax revenue, perhaps, and it depends on the jurisdictions, right? And so part of the analysis was to try to be very comprehensive on all this. Obviously, more work needs to be done, but the other aspect that is missing and that comes up, and we tried to kind of counter was this issue of indirect costs, which you're mentioning is system balancing costs, and that's used as a kind of a push back against kind of retiring coal and doing renewables. That renewables are they are intermittent and variability in their power output, and so therefore when you're losing a coal plant, you're losing those system balancing needs. So the point I'm trying to make is that this is all stuff beyond the direct costs we did try to consider, and try to make it as a part of our framework. And this was a World Bank study that we did, and it's now a journal paper. So happy to kind of talk more about that, but it's all in the paper.
Sure.
And having said that, I think there is still more work to be done to look at, as you said, the second order effects and the third order effects and what are the impacts on the communities. But it's a topic that's of pretty keen interest to academics.
Okay, thank you. Namita, you have looked at land issues very closely, and your remarks, please.
Good evening, everyone. I want to start by thanking Chandrabhushan and Manvi for inviting me to this report release, and to congratulate both of you and the iFOREST team on the release of this very important report. I don't work specifically on coal, so the report was very insightful and instructive for me. And I think I just want to celebrate the contribution it has made to illuminating this issue using data. I think it was very useful to have the references in terms of the numbers of coal plants, the kind of area they occupy, what it means in terms of decommissioning these plants, and the various issues that are inherent within that. And I think that that's really important, because in most issues pertaining to land and perhaps in other areas as well, we have a lack of data. And I think that that's important, partly because it helps to guide policy better, but also because in any issue, any social, economic, political issue, there are multiple stakeholders. And in many ways, the information asymmetry that exists creates a power imbalance as well. And insofar as you are illuminating the space or the field for everyone, it helps to reduce the information asymmetry and thereby the power imbalance that exists between various stakeholders, and that actually allows for better policy making to happen. So congratulations for that. The second thing, I was very happy to, the very title of the report, which talks about just decommissioning of power plants. I mean, I think that that is a very important lens through which to look at this issue. And it is particularly important because I think, just to put this report and my own work into context, coal mining is one of the major sources of displacement of people. And I was, very pleased to hear that you'll be releasing another report on coal mining. It would be great to see the report on coal mining and the data that comes out of it alongside this report. And so I'm very much looking forward to that. Congratulations also on completing that. But generally the development discourse that we've had, which has been premised on capital formation, industrialization, urbanization, has been of a utilitarian nature. It has been premised on the greatest good of the greatest number, which means that if anything is justified, even if there are losers in the process, so long as it furthers those goals, where we have a particular conception of development. And that is what is now being challenged with the whole climate crisis, is that whether that particular conception of development, which is based on intensive resource extraction, industrialization, urbanization, whether that is sustainable or not. In fact, we are in a very dire climate crisis right now. This year, I think we've experienced it all over the world. And so I think insofar as, we have this utilitarian notion, which is problematic now for our very survival as a species. But also throughout the fact that we've had this utilitarian conception of development, it has been in conflict with a dignitarian rights discourse, wherein the people who are losers in the process, their rights are not necessarily regarded, and that leads to conflict on the ground. So I was very interested to see the map of the coal power plants, and I would refer you to our report on the legal regime and political economy of land rights of scheduled tribes and scheduled areas of India. Because for the first time for that report, we actually mapped the scheduled areas in India. And most people don't even know what the scheduled areas are. But these are areas that are geographically demarcated pursuant to the 5th and 6th schedules of the Constitution, and essentially which have tribal or Adivasi dominated areas, right? And it was very interesting for me to see, where the plants are, and it'd be very interesting to see when you put out the report on mining where the mines are, because I could see almost a very strong overlap with the map of scheduled areas that we've created. And in our report, we also have a map of the forest cover of India, as well as of dams and mining. And we have shown that, the intensity of forest cover is twice in the scheduled areas, as well as of dams and mining, which means that if there is a coal plant, it is very likely, more likely than not. In fact, it's twice as more likely to displace an Adivasi person as compared to any other person. And in fact, there's other data apart from our own work, which shows that even though scheduled tribes are only 8.6% of India's population, they constitute 40% of the people who have been displaced since independence, from 1950 to about 2000, for which the data exists, primarily due to coal mining, wildlife parks and sanctuaries, and other industrialization projects. So to that extent, what where the coal plants have existed and how that process has happened itself is perhaps not just, and therefore, but we can learn from the lessons from the mistakes of the past and hope for a just transition as we go forward. So now, given that time frame, I would also refer you to the map on the Land Conflict Watch website, where they trace active land conflicts. And you'd be surprised to know that, I mean, these plants have existed for a while, and mining, in the mining report that you bring out, mining might have been going on for a while, but there may still be active land conflicts. And therefore, I would refer you to also compare your map with their map, because that actually documents where there are active land conflicts and for how long they have been going on. And a lot of them are due to power projects. And coal and thermal power plants have been the biggest source of power for the country. So much of the conflict is perhaps about many of these plants that might be decommissioned or we might be thinking about in the future. So I would refer you to that as well. On the specific recommendations of your report, it was, you basically identified 3 types of land. One is freehold tenure, the others are leasehold, where it's either non-forest land or forest land. And you make 3 specific recommendations. The first of which was having a clear policy on land repurposing with adequate incentives. Nobody can disagree with that. I think that that's important. The second was to amend the laws to, especially the Land Acquisition Acts, to specify dismantling and remediation standards. Now here I want to say that the Land Acquisition Act is really about acquisition of land by the government. It doesn't really, and of course we have, our own data at the Land Rights Initiative shows that we have hundreds of laws of land acquisition in the country, but for coal, and there is specifically the Coal Bearing Areas Act, and we have a specific central legislation that exists apart from the land acquisition laws, both the 1894 and now of course the new law. I don't think that would be the way to go for what you wish to achieve, because acquisition is specifically a power which, it's basically the power of eminent domain, which allows the state to take away land for a public purpose upon payment of compensation. The story kind of ends there. And I don't think that you necessarily need to go there for achieving the objectives that you have. So let's look at the 3 types of land that you identified. For the leasehold land, which is non-forest, it's the easiest in a way, because whatever standards you wish to specify, the government could specify in the leasehold agreement itself. So whenever you give somebody a lease, you ask them to do this, and they can also make modifications to the original lease agreement by which they would have given this to the coal plant. They can just make a modification and say that you have to do these things, and if you don't do that, then there'll be consequences. It's a contract because it's a leasehold agreement. As regards the, the land which belongs to the government itself, I mean, hearing the gentleman speak about the Badapur power plant and, the obligations that the government took, I think that essentially it has to come from the government, what the standards are, and they need to follow them. And I think, given all the environmental standards that are there and the litigation processes that are there, I think the government can be held to account, hopefully, through the rule of law, in case they don't necessarily follow these standards with respect to the land which is freehold. As regards forest land, I think that's a different category. And I think that, again, like the reason why I was mentioning, the fact that there's been considerable injustices in the process of acquisition of these lands for coal mining and for coal plants, I think maybe we can keep those in mind and seek to remedy those injustices by ensuring that when we repurpose the land, the communities that have affected by the displacement, who might still be in the neighborhoods, that they may be consulted in the process of what the land can be best repurposed for. And forest land should be reforested. And we have had considerable success in joint forest management with communities. And so I think that a lot of work can be done to ensure that this repurposing happens in a sustainable manner. And I particularly want to mention the indigenous conception of Jal Jangal Zameen here, because they don't see land and environment as separate. So according to the indigenous or Adivasi perspective, Jal Jangal Zameen, which is water, forest and land, are part of one indivisible ecosystem. And therefore, you cannot imagine repurposing of the land or the environmental hazards that you have been talking about, and some of the other speakers have also been talking about. They have to be seen in a holistic way. And unfortunately, because we have not seen them in a holistic way all this time, our policies have been in silos. So we talk about land, we talk about environment, and that's why we are in this climate crisis, and that's why we are talking. But again, we are talking, piecemeal reforms. And I completely understand that we need to sort of, do things sectorally, but I think we need to have a larger imagination, because it is the lack of that larger imagination that has led us to this crisis, which is leading us to take these measures. So I think it would be good to have that imagination going forward. And in precisely, I mean, we've seen that, I was in Australia for the month of June, and I learned that even though the forest fires that have happened in Australia, in fact, the forest department there is now actively involving indigenous communities, because they've realized that actually they were much better at fighting these forest fires, and they have completely lost that knowledge because those communities were, completely defeated and destroyed, and there's a high level of criminalization. So I think people are now beginning to understand that indigenous imagination of looking at land, looking at all of these things is what we need to fight back. And therefore, even at the stage of conceptualizing these recommendations, these policies, it would be great to have some representatives commenting on your report, who are coming from those communities, who are displaced or who are in the vicinity of these areas, who will perhaps know a lot about the land and what it can be repurposed for, what it can be best repurposed for, rather than some bureaucrats who are sitting in Delhi or some other place who are making those determinations. So the third recommendation, again, the empowered committees that you're talking about at central and state level for taking repurposing decisions. On those committees, it would be good to have representatives from the Ministry of Environment and Forest, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, but also from the communities themselves, especially now that we have the implementation of the Forest Rights Act. And again, we have the giving of forest rights in these areas. It is quite likely that the power plants are in areas where there is forest cover. How can we rehabilitate it into the larger ecosystem? It would be great to have that representation on these committees. I think I'll stop there. And once again, congratulations to you on this fantastic report. I learned a lot, and I commend others to read it.
Thank you. We were very surprised to look at the numbers in terms of the amount of forest land that has gone for thermal power plant. We never expected so much of forest land being used for constructing thermal power plant. We thought it was largely coal mines, but we realized that a vast amount of land thermal power plant has gone on forest land. And we looked at contract, leasehold contract, and what we found in leasehold terms, which Manvi said, the term is the land will be returned in, I think they said grassed. So you put grass and return the land, or in good condition. So the language which is there in the leasehold document is very, very ambiguous in terms of in which form the land has to be returned. to the state government or the central government. But I think your suggestions are extremely important, and we will look at it.
Yeah,
We have the most
I think
important person.
Just
Yeah.
on that, because even if you were to amend a law to say, okay, what does this mean? You would have to make it retrospective in operation. So it's much better that if for the plants that you're decommissioning right now, if they can actually reach some meeting of minds between the parties on what this good condition means, and going forward, perhaps a policy can be made. Of course, you can apply things retrospectively as well, but then you will have the danger of litigation and things getting stuck. So that was why I was making the suggestion if this can be agreed to by the parties in the leasehold contract.
Sure. So Mr. Pradhan is there with us. He's from Labor Union, and he's from an area where a plant is being closed. There has been some protest from contract worker. May I now request Mr. Saubhagya Pradhan for his comments. Is he connected?
I'll just check.
Yeah. By the time Mr. Pradhan is joining, Girish, there are a few questions for you and also one for Dharmesh. Can I ask? So there is one question which is about specifically asked to you that in most estimate, the burden of decommissioning cost is being shifted to tariff payer and tax. The question is, should the power plant investor not bear the liability of decommissioning? And in India, it is quite important, as I said, was that the land where plant has been constructed, in many of the land, they might not be repurposed for a new and profitable economic activity. In that case, who should bear the cost of the liability? Should it go to the taxpayer, ratepayer, or investor should take the responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, part of our analysis when we looked at repurposing, and you're saying repurposing may not be possible in all times, right? One of the questions we also asked was if we could do a complete analysis of what the direct costs are of closing down a plant, and that could be recuperated by selling the scrap. And it turns out that just the selling the scrap metal and the equipment, you can actually kind of mostly overcome the direct costs of the plant closure. Perhaps not the indirect costs, which I mentioned, but the direct costs could be recuperated just by selling scrap. So in some sense, you don't need to pass the costs on unless there are net costs after you kind of utilize all the economic kind of benefits of decommissioning the coal power plant. And in that context, I mean, if the plant owner is decommissioning, they should be responsible.
Mr. Chaudhary is there with us from NTPC. Mr. Chaudhary?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So one of the things that NTPC did was it did ask for, you did ask for some cost compensation from the regulator for 2 years of decommissioning, right?
Yeah.
Just connect me.
Okay, I'm just coming, Mr. Sobha. Just 1 minute. I'll just.
Yes.
Mr. Chaudhary?
Yeah. Actually, it was regarding the 2000 tariff period 2009 and 14. The CRC has in principally approved some capital addition. So we did capital addition from 2014 to 19 period. So that capital addition along with the capital spares that were to be capitalized. So the CRC and the stakeholders and then came in confrontation, and then we filed the petition that we will be, please kindly allow that add cap so that once it is allowed, those costs can be put in the capital addition and can be recovered from the then building given to the beneficiaries. That is the petition. That is not about the cost of decommissioning, which is happening as of now.
So it was recovery of new capital that you had invested through fixed costs.
Till closure of the plant.
Till the closure of the plant. Okay. Mr. Pradhan?
Yes.
Please.
I'm ready.
Yeah. Please go ahead. We are ready to listen to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chandrabhushan and Mandvi. to invite me to the seminar. I am from Odisha, Talcher. Are you listening?
Yes, yes, yes. Listening to you. Talcher Coalfield. Yes.
Yes, yes, Talcher Coalfield, and there is one just stop closed Talcher Thermal Power Station, Btps, on 31st March 2001, without giving any notice to the workers. Suddenly they have stopped that plant, and all the workers are at the receiving end. None of them get their retirement dues, nor their regular wages, nothing else. And we went to High Court, Odisha High Court, and there was a directive to give the closure benefit to all the workers. But still the case is going on, and TTPS is under NTPC, and the contractor workers are the receiving end. Regular workers were disturbed elsewhere in nearby areas, but the contract workers, around 1,500 contract workers, are not getting their wages and still fighting and going on dharana till today even. They are all going on dharana, and we High Court one directive was there to give them the retirement benefits, but still the management is fighting for not to give any retirement benefit. Apart from the working class, these small businessmen and the small tour operators, all are suffering there. There is a very good market also there, but the market is now closed and it's like a deserted loop, that place. And the ordinary villagers, surrounding villagers are also not getting any benefit. Previously, they were under the CSR scheme of NTPC. Now they are not getting any benefits. Moreover, there were 2 schools operated by DAV. And the management already given notice to close the DAV schools. However, due to workers' protest, nearby villagers' protest, the schools are now running for at least 1 year for this educational. And all the workers are suffering for this.
So what is the demand that contract workers and community has made to NTPC? Because I understand that NTPC is constructing another plant there.
Another plant, it will come up around 5 years. After 5 years, at that time, many of the workers will lose their job due to their retirement age. They just want some maintenance cost, their legitimate dues, and they did not get till that, all the contractor workers. That is our demand. As per law, जो demand hai, that should be complied with by the NTPC, but NTPC is not recognizing them as their contractor workers, as they were all working under the subcontract people, but not directly under the NTPC, but under some contractors they were working, and there are no relation. The NTPC is telling that there is no relation with employer-employee relationship with the contract workers.
Okay.
Yes.
No, thank you very much. Mr. Chaudhary, is there anything that you would like to add to what Mr. Pradhan has said? If you want to add something there.
And in the case of that culture, it's good that the new units are coming up. Though there are 2 things. One are the construction workers, one are the operation and maintenance workers. Naturally,
Yes.
O&M workers will be affected till the time the O&M phase comes in. Things are commissioned. So, being the NTPC fraternity, I should not comment on that. But naturally, in general, there should be some framework. So these people who are losing the job for next 5 years, they can be compensated. And then they can be again put into the services. By the time the construction workers who generally come from the other states, they are moved back to their states. Yeah.
Naturally, all are very local people, and the construction workers, purely local people. They are doing their physical labor there.
You know, the issue of labor obviously is complicated issue, because one of the things which is happening in India is that from a lot of formal workers are becoming informal, and contract and subcontract is now part of the game. Most of the labor, at least at low paying job, who are joining big companies are coming as subcontract and even subcontract workers.
Maybe, may I intervene, sir? Lot of earlier the lot of people have said that there should be some planned activity. Had we done it in 5 years planning, then you should train those manpower in the
Yes,
construction work.
Yes.
Once they are trained for the construction, then they could be used locally. No need of putting the outside workers to get the construction.
Yes.
That
So
may
I
be
think
done.
a lot of planning will be required to deal with
Yes.
decommissioning of labor, because even if the repurposing is happening, there's 4 or 5 year period when the community is likely to lose and workers are likely to lose a lot. And how do you reskill them, re-employ them, compensate them is going to be an important part of discussion. I have few questions to Dharmesh. Dharmesh, what is the next step of the guideline case at NGT now?
Well, as gentleman from CPCB said, the guidelines are supposed to be finalized. We had sent our comments to them, but we've not really heard anything after that. The guidelines themselves are kind of, very basic. So I think what you mentioned, that, the fact that we need laws and the fact that we need strong binding laws on decommissioning. Guidelines will just give guidance on what has to be done. So I think next steps, we are still going to pursue this because we filed a couple of RTIs with CPCB on the status of the guidelines. And basically the status is we filed about 2 months back. And again, today we're hearing from CPCB that things have not moved forward. So we are hoping to pursue this with CPCB, and then we will look at the next steps after that. It has to be legal recourse or whatever.
Okay. So we are coming to the end of the webinar. This was actually, just to let you know that this is the first conversation we are happening after the release of our report. There will be multiple conversations we are going to do over a period of time. In fact, we will continue with this entire program on just transition of thermal power sector and industrial sector over the next couple of years. And we will work on this topic and have multiple discussion and interaction on a specific aspect of decommissioning. So the first conversation is always a conversation where you want to put as much information out as possible. That we have done. The idea is now to look at each segment of the information in a much more granulated fashion and get the perspective of everyone together. Girish comes from a very economist perspective of looking at cost and benefit. Namita looks at from what Adivasi community and repurposing would look like. Dharmesh will look from the perspective of hazardous waste and environmental implications and where that hazardous waste is going. So this is the beginning of conversation, I believe, of a very important topic of environment and land and labor jurisprudence in India. In the history of India, for the first time, we are talking about large-scale closure. Anyone who has traveled to Mumbai will see the fate of textile mills in Mumbai. They are still there. They have not been decommissioned properly. The land has not been repurposed because of the kind of legal cases and the quagmire of legality all those land have come into. The Bandra and the Juhu, the areas of textile are still there. You don't want that for large scale industry, coal-based dependent industry, where the land is in thousands of kilometers square. And the number of workers involved are in millions. So this is an important conversation, an important aspect of of legal and regulatory reform that is required in the country. We are hopeful you will be part of this journey with us. We will be in touch soon, and I would like to thank everyone. As far as Q&A is concerned, some of the questions that were asked, we do not have answer, frankly. One person asked, that NTPC is a public sector company, but what happens to a private company who wants to close beforehand? Okay, I do not have answer for that. Neither I want to, hazard a guess to that answer right now, because those answers will come over a period of time as this conversation, progresses. So thank you very much. As I said, this is the part A of the report. Part B of the report is coming on 20th, where we are going to look at closure of coal mines and what are the land, labor, and financial aspect that is there. And we are only looking at unprofitable and abandoned coal mines. And there are a large number of unprofitable and abandoned coal mines in India. In fact, more than 300. So that data will be equally illuminating in terms of what kind of gaps are there in our regulatory and legal framework. You're most invited to register for that. It is on 20th. And I thank all of you. Thank my colleague Mandvi. I thank Yukti, who has worked on this project, and all other people who have been part of this journey with us. Thank you very much and good evening. Girish, you wanted to say something?
Oh, just a quick answer to the question on the private guy. So at the end of the day, it has to be kind of, you can buy out an asset, which is a private sector asset. It's just that you have to make sure that they get the return on investment. And I think a lot of these international financing mechanisms are looking at both private and public from a kind of a economics and finance perspective. Obviously, that leaves out, what you do on the remaining part of the equation. But from an economics perspective, it's all doable.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And, as I said, CPCB is still looking for comments. If you have any comments, please do send it to them. And so that they are able to incorporate your views as well in the guidelines that they're preparing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.